Hi, my name is Mason Clements, and I will be doing a video presentation on the bubonic plague. So in this first slide here, you can see there's a lithograph done by August Carodi in 1860 depicting the Black Death, which, as you can see, was a very devastating pandemic. Kind of shown in the artwork, you can see there's a lot of people mourning, a lot of death. We'll talk about the exact numbers in just a second, but first let's talk about what the bubonic plague is. Alright, so what is the bubonic plague? Well, the bubonic plague is a disease that is caused by a strain of bacteria called Yersinia pestis, which diverged from Yersinia pseudotuberculosis around 6,000 years ago. And here on the right you can see I have an electron micrograph of Yersinia pestis, just to see what it looks like. Okay, let's talk about the life cycle of Yersinia pestis. So the main way that the bubonic plague is spread is by fleas. So the way that it does this is it starts out with an infected flea, which will bite an animal and give it Yersinia pestis infection. And as that animal, gets the infection and the infection spreads into their blood, then if other fleas bite that animal, they too will get Yersinia pestis in their stomachs as they drink that animal's blood. And then the Yersinia pestis bacteria in those fleas, it will multiply inside of their stomachs to the point where there isn't any more room in its stomach for blood, so the flea will have to regurgitate whenever it's feeding on animal blood. So then if those fleas ever go to a different animal and want to feed off of their blood, they will have to regurgitate the Yersinia pestis bacteria into that animal, which spreads the Yersinia pestis bacteria between different animals. So it has a very strong relationship with fleas. There are other ways that the bacteria can be spread without fleas, but the bubonic plague specifically is spread by fleas. That there are other diseases that can be caused if it infects different areas of your body. We'll talk more about that a little bit later, but the bubonic plague specifically is spread by fleas. Okay, here I have a diagram kind of showing what I talked about with the life cycle of Yersinia pestis. So as you can see, if an infected flea bites a rodent, it will infect the rodent, which will infect other fleas who bite that rodent, which then go on to infect new rodents, and so on. That cycle continues. And it doesn't have to just be rodents. It can infect any mammals, anything that it bites. And when those fleas bite humans, that is what we call the bubonic plague. But there are other ways that this disease can be spread. And if it's spread in a different way and it affects a different part of your body, then it actually has different names. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about the different diseases you can get from Yersinia pestis, and how you get them and what causes it and what the symptoms are of those different diseases. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the symptoms that you can experience if you have Yersinia pestis in your system. So there are 3 diseases that Yersinia pestis can cause. The first is the bubonic plague, the second is the septicemic plague, and the third is the pneumonic plague. So the bubonic plague is an infection of the lymph nodes. And this is what you get if an infected flea bites you and regurgitates the Yersinia pestis into your system. It will go on to infect your lymph nodes. And the bubonic plague symptoms include fever, chills, weakness, and swollen lymph nodes called buboes, which you can see on this image on the right. And if left untreated, the bubonic plague can actually develop as the Yersinia pestis bacteria spreads into other parts of your body. So if it enters into your blood and starts infecting your blood, then it is called the septicemic plague. And its symptoms include fever, chills, extreme weakness, abdominal pain, shock, and acral gangrene. And acral gangrene is gangrene that is specific to the extremities of your body, so like the fingers, toes, and nose. And the gangrene is just the dying of tissue from lack of blood supply. It will turn black and it will die as those extremities don't get any oxygen. So if Yersinia pestis enters into your lungs, we call that pneumonic plague, which is actually the most contagious form of the disease. And it is characterized by fever, headache, weakness, pneumonia, shortness of breath, chest pain, and a cough. And the Yersinia pestis bacteria, when you do cough, it will linger onto tiny water droplets in the air. And if other people inhale those water droplets, then they will also get the pneumonic plague. So that's kind of how it spreads with the pneumonic plague. With the septicemic plague, it's not as common for it to spread. It can spread if you have like an open wound that comes into contact with a different open wound of someone who is infected. And it's spread through that way, but the most common form of the plague spreading is the pneumonic plague, just because the airborne disease, it can really spread far using the air. Okay, so as we already talked about, Yersinia pestis will affect your body in different ways depending on where it is. So if it's in your lymph nodes, that will be the bubonic plague. If it's in your blood, that will be the septicemic plague. And in your lungs, it's the pneumonic plague. So let's talk a little bit about the bubonic plague specifically, and how that affects your body. Okay, so I have this diagram here showing the process through which Yersinia pestis will infect your body. So in the case of the bubonic plague, when a flea first bites you and injects you with Yersinia pestis, it will actually take advantage of your body's natural response, your body's natural efferocytosis, which is the process of macrophages kind of consuming dying cells. It will actually use that to enter into the macrophages, where it can be transported and kind of be safe, where it will lie low, and it will purposely not trigger your immune response, your immune system. At this stage, it will just multiply and migrate to your lymph nodes. And once there are a lot of the bacteria inside of those macrophages, they will actually cause the macrophages to self-destruct by hijacking the cell death programs, releasing the Yersinia pestis out into your lymph nodes. And at this stage, they will begin to secrete effector proteins, which are proteins that take control of host eukaryotic cells. And this is where the infection begins. This is where you start to see the symptoms of the bubonic plague. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the history of the Yersinia pestis bacteria and its effect on people and our society. So the very first pandemic of the bubonic plague was called the Plague of Justinian, which was named after the Roman emperor of the time. And the Plague of Justinian was the very first known pandemic of the bubonic plague. It originated in Pelusium, Egypt, where from there it spread into the Mediterranean basin. And it's estimated that it killed tens of millions of people. This pandemic started in the year 541, and it lasted for about 2 centuries, a little over 2 centuries. All right, the second pandemic was probably the most infamous, known as the Black Death, which started in the 1320s era, and it killed somewhere between 25 to 50 million people. Some people speculate it may have been even more than that, but there's no way of knowing for sure. But that was about 1/4 of the population of Europe, so massive, massive impact. It killed so many people, which is why the Black Death is such an infamous plague. It was truly devastating. It was one of the most lethal pandemics of the plague in history. Just for reference, when it reached Iceland in 1402, it killed an estimated 50 to 60% of the population within 2 years. And it also killed up to 60% of the population in Western Eurasia. So it was devastating. Truly awful. All right, the third plague pandemic occurred in China, Yunnan, China, in the 1850s, and it spread throughout China, and it was merchants traveling to China and to other parts of the world that spread the plague from outside of China to the rest of the globe. India suffered the most deaths due to the pandemic. They had 12 million deaths, and it's estimated there are 15 million deaths globally due to this pandemic. All right, so currently there is no vaccine for Yersinia pestis, unfortunately. There used to be a vaccine, but it was discontinued due to it not being incredibly effective while also causing adverse side effects. They are currently working on a new vaccine, but it is not out yet. So for now, the current treatment for the bubonic plague is antibiotics, which work best if they are administered within the first 24 hours of showing symptoms. Otherwise, the mortality rate will increase, as well as the chance of spreading the disease. So it's best to get treatment for the disease very early on. Same with septicemic plague. And these, you generally don't have to be hospitalized if they are treated early. However, if you have the pneumonic plague, you are required to be isolated during the treatment process. All right, so I have here a chart showing vaccine prototypes being tested with animals to see their effectiveness. As you can see, there are some vaccines that seem to work pretty well on the animals against the disease. So hopefully that will mean that soon there will be a vaccine available. However, they're still undergoing testing, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. I wanted to point out some of these. Looking at the charts, you can kind of see that the bubonic plague doesn't seem to be too hard to treat. There's a lot of these vaccine prototypes that have 100% protection against the bubonic plague. It seems like the pneumonic plague is the one that's really hard to get at. Just looking at these charts, there's only one that has 100% protection against the pneumonic plague, but that one does not have protection against the bubonic plague. But it's just kind of interesting to see where we are in terms of the vaccine being developed. And of course, these are still being tested. There are still risks, potential side effects that need to be ruled out while these are being developed, but just thought I would share that. So with that, that concludes my video presentation on Yersinia pestis and the bubonic plague. Here are my sources that I used for this. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye.